I'm Jim Feldman, author of A Storied Wilderness, The Rewilding the Apostle Islands. At the heart of this book is a question. How do we understand the role of history in places that we today value as wilderness? We can find places like this all over the country, in national parks and forests, and also on state-owned and private lands. Our popular understanding of wilderness often seems to indicate that history, the evidence of human use on the landscape, makes wild places less valuable. In this book, I suggest that history can in fact deepen our understanding of wild nature and our motivation to protect it. I explore these questions by examining the environmental history of the Apostle Islands, a beautiful and wild archipelago of 22 islands that stretch off northern Wisconsin's Lake Superior shore. But the issues that I discuss apply equally well to other wild places with human pasts, places like the Adirondack Mountains of New York, Point Reyes National Seashore in California, and even to the crown jewel national parks like the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone. The Apostles certainly seem like a wilderness. The islands have distinctive red sandstone cliffs and sea caves, carved by the pounding waters of Lake Superior. There are lonely beaches, perfect for solitary walks and exploration, and a rich forest mosaic that includes some of the most important stands of old-growth forest in the western Great Lakes. In fact, in 2005, a panel of experts gathered by National Geographic even named Apostle Islands National Lakeshore as the most appealing national park in the country because of its healthy and wild environments and the opportunities one finds for solitude. Visitors come to the region to enjoy the rustic charm of the little town of Bayfield and to explore the island wilderness. What they don't see, what they don't expect to see, is evidence of the island's rich and deep human history, a history that often seems at odds with the apparently pristine environments of today. Native Americans used the islands for centuries, and the Ojibwe Indians regard Long Island as a sacred site for its role in their migration to the region. French fur traders and missionaries arrived in the 1600s, and Madeline Island served as the center for the fur trade. Euro-American residents of the region fished, farmed, and logged in the islands after the 1850s. All of these people made homes and workplaces in the islands. Their actions, their stories, remain embedded in the island wilderness. It once seemed like this history would disqualify the islands as a national park. In 1930, landscape architect Harlan Kelsey evaluated the Apostle Islands as a potential addition to the national park system. Local boosters hoped that a park would anchor a new economy based on tourism, an economy that would replace the logging that was rapidly dwindling as forest resources ran out. But Harlan Kelsey was not impressed. What must once have been a far more striking and characteristic landscape of dark coniferous original forest growth has been obliterated by the axe followed by fire, Kelsey reported. The ecological conditions have been so violently disturbed that probably never could they be more than remotely reproduced. But Kelsey was wrong, at least in his assessment of the area's future. In 1970, Congress established Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, naming the primitive conditions and wilderness character of the islands as the primary motivation for the creation of the park. In November 2004, Congress designated 80% of the National Lakeshore as the Gaylord Nelson Apostle Islands Wilderness. Pristine though the islands may seem, evidence of logging and other extractive activities that so disturbed Harlan Kelsey remain in the island wilderness. The composition of the island forest bears the unmistakable imprint of logging, and logging camps lay hidden in the woods. In some places, little remains but the ruined foundations of a building or two. In others, rusting machinery and old bulldozer blades provide additional clues to resource production of the past. The bedrock sandstone of 3 islands reveals the geometric lines of quarries last active over a century ago. Forest clearings filled with wildflowers mark the site of abandoned farms, and old fishing camps still dot the shorelines. The ruined landscape viewed by Harlan Kelsey endures, obscured by today's wild, vibrant, and healthy environments, but present nonetheless. To understand and to protect this wilderness, we need to recognize the role of the stories that lay buried there. How do we describe what has happened in places like the Apostle Islands, places where wild nature has returned after long periods of intensive human use? We don't have an accurate word to explain this process. Terms such as exploitation, degradation, and destruction are usually used to describe the impact of industrial activity on the landscape. Healing and recovery portray the return of wilderness characteristics to a once degraded place. These terms apply in places where industrial resource extraction has left behind clear cuts or open mining pits. But surely not every human action is one of degradation. What about the fishermen and farmers who made homes in the Apostles? If the choices they made did not lead to degradation, then recovery does not explain what has happened since those activities ceased. The term rewilding is a better fit. The Apostle Islands have become wild again not simply because of nature has muted the signs of past human abuse. Rewilding landscapes provide examples of the ongoing impact of human choices on natural processes and of natural conditions on human history. These landscapes represent both history and nature, working simultaneously and together. The story of rewilding provides the central theme for this book. How did the logging and fire-scarred wasteland viewed by Harlan Kelsey in 1930 become a wilderness in just a few decades? Forest regeneration alone cannot explain the origins of this wilderness. The rewilding of the islands was not accidental, not simply the result of ecological processes left to play out on their own. The forests regenerated in ways profoundly influenced by their history of human use. And ongoing choices about how to value and use the island shaped the rewilding of the apostles as well. In this book, I explore the intersecting natural and cultural processes that led to the rewilding of the islands. These include changing patterns of tourism, an activity that has taken place in the islands for over 150 years, the growing authority of the state, and the way the state used conservation to reshape island environments, shifting ideas about wilderness, and the move towards a wilderness ideal that excludes people, and national park policies put in place to manage for this ideal, and the changing environments of the islands themselves, and the ways that people responded to these changes. All of these elements contributed to the rewilding of the islands. Places like the Apostle Islands provide the opportunity to reframe our discussions about the relationship between wilderness and history. For most of the 20th century, conversations about American wilderness have been conversations about the American West, featuring debates about Utah's Red Rock Canyonlands or the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest. With these spectacular and relatively undisturbed locations as a backdrop, wilderness conversations have focused on the protection of pristine nature against an encroaching and destructive civilization. Eastern wild places provoke different conversations. When wilderness characteristics return after decades or centuries of human use, the story of an advancing, degrading civilization does not make much sense. Forests reclaiming once cultivated fields, trees growing through abandoned foundations, and the return of long extirpated species seem to indicate that nature, not civilization, is on the offensive. These places require us to rethink the relationship between nature and culture with provocative results. As we recognize the importance of history in understanding wild places, long humanized landscapes such as the Apostle Islands take on a new meaning. They point to a more open way of thinking about human-natural interactions over the long term. The narrative of rewilding, as it has taken place in the Apostles and in many other places, facilitates these new conversations. Rewilding is occurring in every corner of the country, and the management dilemmas it poses are equally widespread. From New York's Adirondack Mountains, where managers continually reinterpret the mandate that their forests remain forever wild, to Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, which houses the ruins of the settler communities displaced by the national park, to the vast wilderness of Olympic National Park in Washington, where the National Park Service struggles over how to manage historic forest clearings and dilapidated shelters that have long served as elements of the park's recreational landscape. These places, each rewilding in its own way, tell stories about the ongoing interactions of nature and culture. The management of these places depends on recognizing the stories that explain them. The scars from logging and resource extraction in the Apostle Islands that so disturbed Harlan Kelsey in 1930 might be hard to see today, but they are there. These scars provide an apt metaphor for the management dilemmas faced by the park officials. It would be easier to manage the islands by pretending that these scars don't exist. Stories of pristine nature, or even stories of nature recovering from abuse, are easier to tell than those of rewilding. But such stories miss the chance to draw deeper, richer meanings from the islands, quieting the conversations about the relationship between nature and history so central to understanding rewilding landscapes. They also fail to provide answers to the most challenging management questions posed by these places, maintaining and nurturing wild, healthy environments, balancing competing demands on resources, mitigating visitor impact on places valued for both natural and cultural reasons. These challenges can only be met by keeping past uses and ways of valuing nature always in front of us. And that is the ultimate goal of A Storied Wilderness, to help us consider the past as we strive to protect the wild places that we cherish.